I just did it.
There it goes. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to take a minute and talk about weatherization readiness. I've talked with the coordinators about this a lot, but I want to make sure that everybody on this call is aware of the weatherization readiness funds. And so I wanted to cover just a couple of quick things and then take a minute to answer any questions you guys might have. So if you're not aware, the Department of Energy for the last 3 years has been giving us a small pile of funding called weatherization readiness funds. And these funds can be used to get a house ready to be weatherized. So if you're an auditor, you go out to a house, you recognize that there's something going on in the house that's going to require us to defer the house. In some cases, we can use this funding to actually help the clients get their home out of deferral and get it ready to be weatherized. These funds, I guess a couple of things to be aware of with these funds. First bullet point there is that the weatherization readiness funds cannot be converted to another funding source. So unlike your training, like each of your agencies receives some training and technical assistance funding. And if you don't use all that, your agency can just convert that over to regular program funds, and they can go use that to go weatherize houses. But the weatherization readiness funds they're not allowed to be converted. It's kind of a use or lose situation. We have to use them to get homes ready to be weatherized. If we can't do that, then as you can see on bullet point number 2, the unused weatherization readiness funds must be returned to the Department of Energy. They do let us carry those funds over within a grant cycle. So our grant cycle is currently 3 years long. And so we are in the 3rd year of our current grant cycle. So weatherization readiness funds from 2 years ago and from 1 year ago, we were allowed to carry those over if we weren't able to spend all of them out. But the balance that each of your agencies has right now, it has to be spent by June 30th of 2025, or we will have to hand those funds back to the Department of Energy. The one thing to be aware of with that is, so the Department of Energy worked really hard to get these funds set aside so that we could use them in this way. And they did that because the network was asking for help. The network was telling DOE, we often get people that are basically in a perpetual state of deferral, and we really don't have other ways to help them out. So DOE worked hard to get these funds. If we have to send funds back to them, then we're sending them a message that says we don't need these funds, or we don't need as much as you're giving us. And they're really not giving us that much. They give us about $150,000 a year for the entire program. And we have spread that out across the network, but it doesn't amount to a lot. I may be off a little bit on that. It might be closer to $250,000. But either way, it's not a lot of money to be used for weatherization funds or readiness funds. So the 3rd bullet point there is also very important that you guys are aware of. That if you start to expend weatherization readiness funds on a job, it must result in a weatherized unit. And you don't have to weatherize the house within the grant cycle or within the program year or anything like that, but it must result in a weatherized unit. So just be aware of that. Be careful. If I have noticed some of the notes on the weatherization readiness reports from some of your agencies have showed that, like, you guys have started working on something and then you've handed the project off to another program. If you've spent weatherization readiness funds and that doesn't eventually come back to you where you can weatherize the unit, then you'll have to show that whatever you've done was paid for out of a different funding source. But anyway, just be really careful with that. I realize that stuff changes, sometimes in the middle of the game, things change. And but the requirement there is if we spend any weatherization readiness funds, it must result in a weatherized unit. And then also a reminder, even though the weatherization readiness funds come only from our regular formula grant, the weatherized unit can be either a formula unit or a bill unit. So you don't have to worry about trying the weatherization readiness all in one of the two grants that you currently have. And then the fourth bullet point, weatherization readiness can only be used for the materials and labor costs of the eligible weatherization readiness activities, or basically you can only use weatherization readiness money to pay for that measure. If you send an energy auditor out to do an evaluation on the home, you can't use weatherization readiness funds to pay for the energy auditor's time. You treat it just the same way you would any other weatherization job. You pay for the energy auditor's time out of program. But when you install a new furnace, you would pay for that furnace with, sorry, that's a bad example. Let's go with a health and safety example. If you have a health and safety measure, you're only going to pay for the material and labor of that measure with your health and safety funds. Same thing here. You're only going to use weatherization for materials and labor of the actual measure that you're installing. So let me go over a couple more things and then I'll take any questions and then I'll pass it back to Nikole. This is in our guidelines. So if you want to look it up, you should be able to find it easily. But some of the things that you can use weatherization readiness funds for. This is not an extensive list. This is just a list we've said, you know, kind of in general, we think there may be some opportunities here. And that is, so for vermiculite abatement, plumbing repairs, electrical repairs, we see a lot of knob and tube, but if you needed to upgrade a panel or something like that, that could also be an eligible electrical repair. Non-structural repairs, example, roof repairs. If you have a home in desperate need of a major roof repair or a new roof entirely, you could consider using your weatherization readiness funds to do that. Structural repairs that do not require engineering. If you run into something that does require engineering, I would probably consider it on a case-by-case basis. But as far as you guys just picking something and moving forward without communicating with me, you're allowed to do structural repairs that do not require engineering. Removal of trash and debris, bug or rodent infestation, and mold removal that exceeds the current WAP health and safety plan cost controls. So another thing to be aware of is that you can't use your readiness funds for something that you could use your regular weatherization funds to address. These things have to be outside the scope of normal weatherization. But I go through this list and I want to talk about all these things because I think most of the agencies out there are in danger of not spending all their funds in time. And so I need auditors, I need QCIs, I need intake folks to be thinking about and looking for more opportunities for weatherization readiness projects. When you identify them, we tried to give you a small scope of things. If you find something that's not on this list, talk to your coordinator. Coordinators, be really careful that we don't allow readiness to be a huge distraction from what we're really good at, which is weatherizing houses. But you know, it is that balancing act of keeping the weatherization machine running, but also making sure that we're expending these funds so that we'll have more of them available in the future. And then the other thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about weatherization readiness is we had to put some cost controls in place. We had to tell DOE what our limits were, what we were going to do with these funds and what we would not do with them. So be aware that we've set an average cost per unit at $20,000. And then we have a cost control limit for vermiculite abatement of $14,000 and a cost control limit of all other measures of $5,000. But then just remember, if anything looks like it's going to go beyond that, you just submit a case by case. I excuse our spelling error in our guidelines, but you just submit a case by case request if you're running into something that's going to go beyond the 5,000 or the 14,000. We do need to stay at the 20,000 per unit, but that's going to be combined across the whole program. So that's something I will watch closely. So if you have something that exceeds some of these dollar amounts, but not like it's, if it's double or triple that, we probably are just going to say no. But if you have something that's beyond what's limited here, just submit a case by case and we'll review it. What questions do you guys have about weatherization readiness? All right, I'll take your silence as meaning you have none. If you do have any questions or want to talk about a specific case, don't hesitate to reach out to Rogers or Kaya or really any of my team that it pertains to, or me.
Okay, Nicole, I'll just be super quick. Share my screen. Let me. All right, so I just wanted to chat about the updates that were published not too long ago. It was in October, but I just wanted to take a few seconds to share with you where you can find that update for the weatherization assistant that we use for our audit tool. It's all on your login page. You can read through them, some of the things that they corrected. If at any point you guys are finding any issues, reminder, please reach out to me. The second that you find an issue, if you're not able to work through it, reach out to me. Just shoot me an email, shoot me a text, shoot me a chat, and I'm happy to look over it. But please try to email the Utah WAP, so UTAHWAP at utah.gov email, so that everybody in the team gets it in case I'm out of the office. But either way, shoot me a message if you're having any issues with the weatherization assistant as usual. And then you're welcome to look through any of these updates that they published. And hopefully they fixed a few things for us. That's all. If anybody has questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat, and I'll answer them.
All right. Present again, and here we are. We'll go ahead and get started. I will try and stay within our time restraints. We try and keep these meetings within an hour. I'll do my best to meet that time limit. So I am going to be using Mentimeter today. If you guys were at spring training, you're familiar with it. It's the program that I used at spring training. It just encourages participation. It has the option for you to ask questions within it anonymously. So if you're someone that doesn't want to speak up but has something to say, it's great for that. And then there's also, I'm not doing any kind of like actual quiz with it, but there's participation questions throughout it. So hopefully it just keeps it more engaging. I know that my subject matter does not always apply to every single one of you. Today I'm presenting on materials purchasing. So not all of you have a hand in that, but at any point you could. And so I hope that you can have open ears and listen and hopefully learn a little bit today. As most of you do know, I'm the programmatic side, If you don't know exactly what that is, it's basically the money and the policy and procedure surrounding our program. So sometimes it's a little harder for me to come up with a subject that applies to everyone, but I do my best to try and show you how it does apply to you and to everyone in the program and why it matters. As far as I've said it before, but if we don't have the money, we don't have a program, right? So we got to make sure we're spending the money right. So hopefully everybody's in that wants to be in and participating. If you're not, you can speak up real fast, or I can always put up the code later. In fact, it might stay at the top of the screen. Yes, it does. So, all right, let's get going. So I'm going to start with the 3 W's. If you've attended any kind of training from me, you know, this is what I'm all about. The why. The why. I'm a question asker. Like, I want to know all the information. Like, give me all the things so that I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I like to give that to you guys. So this is applying to the whole training of kind of what I'm going over. But as far as what it is, it's materials purchasing. So that is not just whoever's over your inventory. Maybe that applies to you because maybe you have access to a purchasing card. So that's materials purchasing, right? So having some of this knowledge and understanding some of the rules and where to go is a good thing. Why we're covering it, it is something that I cover under monitoring. So as most of you know, we have the 2 different sides of monitoring. We have the technical side, and then we have the programmatic side. Most of you don't see me or deal with me on the programmatic monitoring. I'm mostly with your coordinator. So unless you're over something that is considered programmatic, such as inventory, we might not have a lot of interaction, but I promise so much of this, it does affect you and directly applies to you and what you're doing in the program. And then the last thing is the where, and that's a big thing. Like I said, it's about the money, it's about policy and procedure. I'm going to show you where you need to go to find these policies and procedures on these individual things, and hopefully show you some of the importance. I'm going to try again to like keep it short and sweet, and not go into too much detail and bore the heck out of you guys. But that's where we're going with this. So I'm going to start out here is what are the things that are on my monitoring checklist specifically that that applies to this subject matter. So what I ask when I come out as far as materials is, number one thing is, did you follow your agency's procurement rules? So we're gonna talk about that. Was your procurement properly documented? We're gonna talk about that. We ask you, this should not be new news to you guys. This absolutely applies to technical. We ask you guys to document. And the reason for it is it's in policy. It's right there. DOE says, we say this a lot. DOE says it's in our policy, it's in their policy. It's proof. It's proof that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? So that applies to anything. Procurement is just another word for purchasing. Anything that we're purchasing, we should be documenting, right? So next thing is, if we're doing a bid process, were our specifications clear, or were your specifications clear? And did they include Appendix A information if needed? Hopefully everybody is familiar with Appendix A. That is in the 2 CFR 440, which is the DOE rules on weatherization for our program. Appendix A is a part of that. And it's an appendix that tells us what our materials, and it's not all of the materials, but some of the materials like insulation and I can't think of something right now off the top of my head, mastic, but certain criteria that those materials have to meet and standards and codes that it has to meet to qualify for us to buy under this program. So if it's under Appendix A, we should be listing that in our specification. We'll talk about that. I'm looking to see if multiple vendors were selected, and we're going to talk about why that's important. And then next thing is, was the selection criteria clear? We're going to talk about why that's important and where that is, who says that we have to do these things. And then was there clear documentation as to why the vendor was selected? We're going to talk about that as well. So that's just an overview of what my checklist is. And so hopefully you can see as we go through this, how it applies to what I look at in monitoring. So this slide's out of place here, sorry. No, it's not, okay. I've got a little thing that's in the way here. Is it allowing you guys to participate here? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So question, do you know where to find your agency's policy and procedure? So this one, as you guys are answering this, currently there are 7 agencies, and all 7 of you have different policy and procedure when it comes to purchasing. My dream one day is that we can have a uniform guidance across the weatherization program, where we look at we're looking at one policy when it comes to any kind of purchasing that has to do with weatherization. Hopefully I'm able to accomplish that one day, but as of right now, everybody has a different policy and procedure. I can't go through all 7 of them. If you don't know where to find it, it's good. There's only one person that said no, they don't know where. That's excellent. If you don't know where to find your agency's policy and procedure, and not just on purchasing, but on anything, ask your coordinator, ask a coworker, ask somebody that can tell you where that is, because policy and procedure is really protection. It's protection if you know the rules and you're following the rules. It's protection for you, it's protection for the agency. So it's important to know. I'm going to cover the basic state and federal rules, but when it comes to purchasing, the major rules that you need to be following are in your agency's policy and procedure. So you need to know what they say. You need to know where to go to find out what they say. To go back to this, did you follow your agency's procurement rules? That's the first thing that I'm looking at. So it's very important for you to know where they're at, know how to find them, and know what they say. Okay, so this is on our guidelines, so state guidelines. I'm just going to go over a couple things on our guidelines when it comes to procurement and where to find it. Y'all should be familiar with our guidelines. All right, so it's in section B here. B7, local agency procurement procedures. Our policy and procedure on this is very general, and it's going to refer mostly to the federal guidance and to your agency's rules. Number 1, this is I'm only going to cover a few of these. If you want to look at them in detail, this is where they're at. And if you are over material purchasing, I would highly suggest that you go in and you read all of them in addition to your own policy procedure. So number 1 rule, all agencies are required to follow all of the rules. So federal, state, and local procurement requirements. What I can tell you is that your agency procurement requirements are the first thing that you're going to go to they're going to follow, I've went through all of the procurement policies at this point. They're all going to follow the state and federal rule. So you guys don't need to worry about the state and federal rule as much. It's, again, I'll keep pushing it. It's your procurement policy that you'll need to know. Again, down here, we talked about it a little bit before, but the key documents agencies need to be reviewing for guidance are the 10 CFR 440. That's the DOE's rules on weatherization and how it should be ran. And the 2 CFR 200. So that is the OMB's rules. So DOE tells us that we have to follow OMB's rules. OMB is the Office of Budget Management. So it basically tells us how we have to handle the dollars, the money that we receive, the grant money, right? How we do that. That's what 2 CFR 200 is, and has very specific rules on how we're to do it. Again, your guys' procurement policy, it follows 2 CFR, but we're going to jump into 2 CFR just a little bit so that I can point to specific things of what I'm looking at and monitoring, why I'm looking at it, and where that information is coming from, right? All those 3 W's. The second part, real quickly, weatherization materials procurement in 712 here. And I mentioned this before, and this is a direct link to the Appendix A. Oh, this isn't the one I expected it to take me to. But Appendix A, there's a few different versions if you go online. It's down here under this document. So it just gives those rules of what these different things, caulking and sealants, the ASTM, that they have to be under those different standards for the conformance. That's really important when we're purchasing materials, that they meet the standards of the program, right? Okay. Any questions so far? And at any time, like I said, you can ask a question in the question area if you don't want to speak up. All right, so just to give you a brief overview or an introduction to the 2 CFR. CFR, for those who are not familiar, is a code of federal regulations. That is what the CFRs are. The 2 CFR 200 provides a comprehensive framework for managing federal awards. Understanding these guidelines is crucial for ensuring compliance in materials purchasing, any kind of purchasing, any kind of handling of the money. But specifically today, we're just going to look at 3 little sections of it, 318, 19, and 20 through 20. I'm going to show you real quick. Wasn't going to, but I'm going to what it looks like here. This is it, the Code of Federal Regulations. 2 CFR 200 covers a lot, right? There's a lot of things in here. We're not accountants, we're not lawyers, we don't know what all of this means, but you don't need to. You just, again, I'll keep repeating it, need to know your local agencies. And most of the local agencies' policies are not as extensive or complicated. But if you ever want to go in and look at it, I can't imagine why you'd want to, but there it is, and that's what it looks like. So in 318, again, I'm giving you very general basics of what they say, but it talks about documenting your actions and decisions and why we do that. To ensure transparency, accountability, and compliance. We are a government program. We handle government money, tax dollars. We are accountable to the public for this money. And the way that they can hold us accountable to it is at any time they can come in and look and see what we're doing and if we're handling the money correctly, right? And how do we show them that? It's by the documentation that we have. This applies in so many ways throughout the program and what we're asking you to do. This is specifically in 200, but it's everywhere because we are a government program. That's why we're documenting. So anytime if somebody comes in and says, show me what you're doing to account for this money that you're spending, we can do that at any time and show them very clearly exactly what we're doing. So here's another participation. So I've talked a little bit about each one of these. If you have questions about materials purchasing rules, where should you go first? Who's been paying attention? Absolutely. Yes, you guys are paying attention. I like it. I said it about 2.5 billion times. So yeah, your agency's policies and procedures. That's your first go-to. They will be following the federal standard and the state standard. So those ones can be kind of equal, right? Because basically the state policy is follow all the policies, right? All right, this one here, it can get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to simplify it as much as I can, but the 200-320. So this one is on the types of procurement. Okay. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this and confuse you guys and bore you guys. But this will be in your agency's purchasing policy. In fact, I'm going to switch over to this right now. I just grabbed a few little snapshots of 4 different agencies out of the 7 of threshold amounts. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth here. But I have on here, see your agency's policy for threshold amounts. So I'm not even going to tell you what the threshold amounts are as far as federally, what the federal government says a micro purchase is, what a small purchase is, what a formal procurement purchase is, because it doesn't matter to you guys. What matters is what your agency says. Languages are different from the federal policy to what your guys' policy says. As you can see on here, some of them specifically say small purchase. Not a single one of them say a micro purchase, which is what the federal guidance says. But your small purchases here, so on all of these, it would be the very first one you see. So small purchase less than 5,000, small purchase process, purchases up to 3,000, purchasing costs less than or equal to 5,000. That is actually considered a micro purchase under the federal guidance. And what it says that we have to do on these kind of purchases, or we're supposed to be doing, I should say, is distributing equitably among qualified suppliers. And it specifically states that a quote isn't required if it's reasonable. Reasonable can be subjective, right? It can. But I want to point you back to documentation. If you're documenting the reasonable part of it, there can be no question on it. Small purchase. This is where it can get confusing. Try not to confuse you guys. The small purchase under federal guidance is when a bid is required. So again, your guys' purchasing policies are kind of all over the place. They're different. For this particular agency, sorry, get my arrow over here. This one over here, purchases over 5,000 but under 25,000. Like I didn't obviously take all their rules. You go to your policy and you're going to see more rules under here. This one, it's a minor purchase. I think the moderate purchase falls under kind of similar rules as far as bidding stuff. So it's going to depend on your policy where that dollar threshold is where it's required. That you get quotes from an adequate number of sources. An adequate number. Typically that's spelled out by your policy. Usually it's 3. Sometimes it's just 2 or more, but your policy should tell you. And then the last one is something that doesn't really apply to materials, but if it's over a certain dollar threshold, then that's when you actually have to do a formal procurement and do a contract for that, right? And that's what we're typically doing for like subcontractor work and stuff, but not for materials. So one of the things that, especially those that are doing the materials purchasing. So if we're talking about materials purchasing, we're going to go back here and we're under that smallest amount, 5,000. Here it's anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000, depending on your policy. Most of your materials purchases are under those thresholds. Not all, I won't say all, but most of them, right? Why are we getting the bid sheets at all? We're going to talk about that. Like, because it basically says your purchasing policy probably says that you don't have to get it, bid sheets, but we're still getting them occasionally, right? What was the #1 rule on the micro purchases? Distribute equitably among qualified suppliers. So it helps us do that, hopefully. That is kind of the goal of it. But there's some other reasons that we do it as well that we're going to get into. So I hope I did a brief enough thing on that you kind of understand it, that I didn't confuse you too much. But I just wanted to show you how there's different levels and different rules on things. Your purchasing cards are going to be under that micro purchase, but some of these things are going to apply, such as the distributing equally, being reasonable, deciding what's reasonable and what's not. All right, and then this is the big one. This is why on most of my checklist, why I'm asking for what I'm asking for. And that's the competition part of it. So even though it says that we don't have to go out and get bids, the 319 specifically states that we cannot restrict competition. This is one thing that your guys' purchasing policy does not typically spell out or explain the why, but this is it. This is the why. We cannot restrict competition. Is using government money, we can't do that. We have to make it as fair as possible, right? Which makes sense. It's specifically states in the 319 that we need to have a clear description of the technical requirements. That's our specification. So we're going to talk about that and what that is, what that means. And then the pre-qualified lists, that one's going to kind of depend on your threshold amounts, but some agencies have pre-qualified lists and they're required to be current and include enough sources to ensure that there's open competition. So if there's like these 3 suppliers that we always go to and we're kind of equitably going amongst them, we just want to make sure that it's current. And giving all of the businesses in our area, I guess, equal chance at our business. And then the conflict of interest, things when you're purchasing materials, if you have some kind of relationship, those kind of rules are found here as well. So creating clear specifications. For those of you who have seen a bid sheet, a full bid sheet, I just pulled a little section of it. But when you're doing an inventory, well, not inventory, a materials purchase, it usually is going into inventory when we're doing this, right? You should have a very clear specification that identifies exactly what we need, what the requirements of whatever that thing is. We want to ensure that that description is measurable and verifiable. And we want to avoid having brand specific language unless it's justified. So I pulled a few examples here because it really varies depending on what kind of material we're purchasing, right? Of how much information we need to have. We have a description here of a furnace, a smart switch. It's just a little one-liner, multi-speed with time delay versus all the information on what specifications that furnace needs to meet. This one is on a CO alarm. This one is under the Appendix A. There's certain requirements that a CO alarm has to meet, and therefore those things need to be under the description. These are them, the 10-year manufacturer warranty, the digital display. There's certain things that have to be in there, and that should be under your specification to show that we are looking for the products that meet the Appendix A guidelines. That's where we want to list that information. We're going to see a little in a couple slides here why it's important to have very clear specifications. Okay, we got another participation. So when we're creating clear specifications, select all that apply. So what would we be looking to do when we're doing a specification? So a description of whatever you're purchasing. Would you want it to be detailed, non-restrictive, and measurable? Identify essential features and requirements. Ensure specifications are measurable and verifiable. And do we want to specify specifically the brand name? So we did mostly good here. So the first three, yes, we want to make sure it's all those. But this one's, we do not want to specify a brand name. We can say something such as, let's say we're trying to get a Nest thermostat. We can't name Nest. We can't do it. That's restricting competition according to the federal government. So we can say such as, features such as a Nest has, but it's better if we just list those actual features within the specification rather than naming it. If there's something very specific that only this brand has, that's when it's most appropriately to use it like that. A product such as the features that this product has, if that makes sense at all. So here's some more snapshots, and we're going to talk about this. So this is the selection criteria. Detailed, non-restrictive, measurable, right? We're not always going off of cost. And that's where, so there's the two parts of here. Is it your solicitation information, like the specifications are not the solicitation. The specification information, the better it is, the better you're meeting the full and open competition. These are some examples here. I left all agents that these came directly from your guys' agencies, right? And I'm going to just point out some things. Maybe you'll see them if you're familiar with this type of thing. But we're not always going off of cost. There's nothing that says, unless your policy does, maybe your policy does say you always have to go off of cost. If it does, do that. Do what your policy says. But sometimes we need to go off of availability or how quickly we can get it, right? And other times it has to do with the quality or the capability of the item, of the product. The most important thing about that is that we have to have that in our specification. We have to have that documentation, that reason why. So I want to point out this one up here. And the basis for the award is better quality unit and comes with a separate coil cabinet that makes it more compatible to different installation scenarios. So as you can see, it was awarded to Thermopride, which is the second vendor, right? If you look at the price, it's not the lowest price, but he specifies better quality. What says that it has better quality? I don't know. I'm not sure. And there might have been something attached to this, and hopefully there is, that justifies that within the better quality means that there was something here that the furnaces from Thermopride met that these other two didn't. Because if all three of these met this specification and they all qualified, what is it that justifies the basis for your award being better quality? You have to get very creative with your specification in order to justify this. It's okay to do. That's the main point of this, but you have to think about the technical capability or quality. That's your selection criteria. You have to make sure it says that in the specification. Okay. This one is an example that I see quite often, where we're selecting this particular vendor, again, not the lowest price, right? We're selecting it for availability. But nowhere on this sheet does it have availability that we looked at. So how do I know when it was available from Johnstone, when it was available from Home Depot? Sometimes quantity is marked here, and there's no quantity amount. So if you're selecting something other than cost, because cost is pretty much always going to be on your bid sheet, right? It needs to be somewhere on here to show that documentation, that number one rule under the procurement standards, that we have to document everything that we're doing and prove that we're doing it correctly. So in this case, we just need to have an extra line here somewhere that shows when this particular item is available, when we're able to get it, and why we're going with this, like showing how this one is sooner. That also has to be in your criteria in order for you to award it, right? I hope that makes sense there. If your criteria is availability, then it has to be under here. Sorry, I'm not explaining that correctly. It has to be under your criteria. It can't just be under your selection. How can you select something that it wasn't under the criteria for that thing? This is some more, and it's kind of the same thing. So this was price and quantity on hand, but there's no quantity specified. So I don't know. How many did they actually need? Maybe they attached the quote from each one of these vendors that showed the quantity that they had available. But if it doesn't have on your specifications of what, on your criteria of the quantity that you needed, there's no way to justify that. In this particular one, they went with price too, but say that it wasn't price and it was the highest one, because Grainger was the only one that had 100 of these available, and that's how many you needed, right? You have to have specified that in order to make this legit. Again, availability. But where on here shows me any kind of quantity? How do I know that that was a criteria that was looked at for every single one of these? That we didn't just go with our favorite vendor and claim that we were going because it was availability. It's just verifying exactly why we selected what we selected, right? All right, another participation question here. What can I consider in my selection criteria? Can select all that apply. Can I consider cost? Can I consider the delivery timeline? Can I consider personal preference, quality of materials, compliance with 2 CFR 200? Excellent. Good, good. So yeah, we can't select our personal preference. However, if there's a reason that you can justify your personal preference under your specification, under the way that you write that, it's all right to do. But it falls more under that quality part, right? If you specify it, what's the reason? What's the thing about this product versus this product that you like more? You have to figure that out and get specific and figure out, okay, what is it about this? And then write that thing in your specification of it must have such and such. So you have to be able to ensure that your personal preference is justified. It can't just solely be based on that personal preference. All right, I sped through it in order to meet time. I'm kind of proud of myself here. Hopefully you learned something today. I did kind of zoom through it. It was a basic overview. I'd like to know and hear from you guys if this is something you do, if you're an inventory person specifically, how helpful it was. Would you like more training on it? Is there anything that could have been covered better that you'd like a little bit more information on? Reach out to me. I'm happy to help and be here. Like I said, I know that this doesn't necessarily apply to all of you guys, but it does. And at one time or another, you may be asked to be a part of this process, even when you're using those purchasing cards and understanding the rules. If you're running out to the store to buy something and the reasonable factor, right? If I'm out in the middle of nowhere and there's one store and something that I can normally get for $20 because I'm in the middle of the boonies, it costs $100, and the closest store is 100 miles away, it's reasonable that I spent that $100, right? So even things like that really do apply to any kind of purchasing, and making sure that you know the rules and protecting yourself, just as the agency is protecting themselves. It's important. So anyways, thank you guys for attending today. I hope that you have a great day. If you have any questions, comments, go ahead and speak now. Otherwise, enjoy your day.
Thanks, Nikole.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikole.
Yeah.
Bye, Justin.